All right, so let's go ahead and start our next lecture. And this is going to be based on the self. And who are you? Okay, so finish these sentences or this sentence. I am. All right, so what comes to mind first when you just finish that simple sentence? Is it a role, like a student, parent, friend, athlete, maybe a trait, like a personality trait, like funny, responsible, ambitious? A group, maybe like the religion you're a part of, a team, profession, a community, or maybe it's a goal. You are a future nurse. You're a future coach. You are a leader. And so it is interesting as to why that answer might have come to mind first, because identity has a lot of different pieces, and not all of them are as accessible as others, and not all are accessible at the same time. It could depend on the situation, your recent experience, who's around, what your current goals are. So here's the thing. Would you have answered it the same way 5 years ago? Probably not. And you probably won't answer it the same way in 5 years. And that kind of shows identity is something that's dynamic. It will shift and change. And the thing is, it doesn't mean it's fake. It's just that different parts of the self become more important in different situations and at different times. And so the question this week is, who am I? And not only that, but how much of that answer is social in nature? And so one way that social psychologists understand identity is through the mental frameworks we have about ourselves. Okay, the first is going to be a self schema. Now, this isn't your personality, so to speak, but it's a framework about ourself. It's organized beliefs and knowledge about ourselves that help us interpret, okay, what happens. It helps us notice certain information. It helps us remember certain experiences, and then it also helps guide our behavior. It doesn't just describe us. It shapes how we experience ourselves. So, as an example, I'm good at school. Okay. And then, okay, let's say you have a bad exam, like you don't do well on a test, and so you think, okay, I'm good at school. I didn't do well on a test. I just had a rough day. Versus thinking I'm terrible at school. You're not necessarily going to think that because you know you're good at school. You just had a bad test. Same exam, okay, but different interpretation. Another example, okay, maybe you have athlete. Okay, in this bubble of on your schema. Again, you have yourself and then all of these attached to you. Okay, you part of your schema is I perform well under pressure. Okay, there's a big game and you perceive it as a challenge versus, okay, if you perceived yourself as somebody choking under pressure, you might perceive a big game as a threat. Same situation again, but because of how you view yourself, you are going to interpret that situation differently and probably perform differently. Okay, and this does go back to about a month ago, person perception. These schemas help us organize information about other people. Now we have schemas that help us organize information about ourselves. It's a similar cognitive approach. And so the schema can affect, okay, what are we paying attention to? What are we remembering? What goals are we pursuing? What do we expect? How do we interpret feedback? And so this can be reinforcing because, again, if part of your self schema is I'm bad at public speaking, you're probably going to avoid speaking. You're probably, as a result, you're not going to get as much practice. And so your performance is going to stay weak. And so, see, I'm bad at it. That gets into the self-fulfilling prophecy, which we will talk about. But this is not fixed. Okay? This is not static. This is dynamic. All of these things can change based upon new experiences, relationships, education, repeated successes. But our beliefs about ourselves, they're not neutral descriptions. They become filters through which we see the entire world. And some of our self-beliefs, or the most powerful ones, they're not about who we are now. They're about who we might become. And that takes us to our next slide, which is Marcus and Nurius's framework called the possible self. And we do carry mental images of the self we hope for, the expected self, and the feared self. Now, the hoped for self, who I want to become, graduate, maybe a parent, maybe a coach, maybe you just want to be healthy. Okay? Feared, unemployed, unhealthy, failing, isolated, addicted. And then realistically, who you might become. Which is usually somewhere in between. Again, graduate, parent, employed, successful. And again, based upon this, this is going to dictate how we behave. What can we do right now to avoid those feared selves? What can we do right now to reach for the hope for unexpected selves? They give us meaning and direction. So, like studying tonight, it's not just I have an exam, it's I'm going to become a nurse. So, the identity makes the behavior meaningful. And it's also a formula in that the approach plus the avoidance, and that the hope for self we're trying to move toward and the feared self we're moving away. And both of them can motivate in different directions. And so, which is more motivating, who you hope to become or who you're afraid of becoming? That's interesting. And there's no universal answer. And again, your possible self, it needs a pathway, it needs specificity in that, I want to become successful someday. Okay, that's vague. But if I say I want to become a teacher, so I need a degree and I need to get my teaching license, and then I need to get my bachelor's degree, make sure I get certification. That's actionable. And that provides a motivation. And that connects who we are right now to who our future self is and what we can do to get here from there. Get there from here. Sorry. Um, the choices that we make can help create our identity. Every repeated choice becomes evidence about the kind of person I'm becoming. Okay, bigger question. Where did these ideas about ourselves come from in the first place? Okay, social psychologists ask, what information are we using to construct the self? We don't have a great internal measuring device. Again, it's hard objectively. Like, how do I know, like, I'm smart, athletic, generous, attractive, successful, socially skilled? Okay, I need a reference point. Okay, your sources could be your experiences, successes and failures. I did well. Your behavior. What do you do over and over? I keep volunteering. So maybe helping is important to me. Okay, we look to other people, feedback from teachers, parents, peers, coaches. We compare. How am I doing relative to other people? And cultures and groups. What traits even count as desirable in my culture or group? Independence, obedience, academic success. Maybe that is highly valued, and so that is a big part of this. Different cultures value different identities. And this is interesting because the self feels really private, but a lot of the information that we use to create the self is actually social in nature. So let's talk about the looking glass self. This is theory by Cooley, and it is sociological in nature. But the idea is that the self develops through interactions. We don't construct our identity completely on our own. Now, we tend to imagine, how do other people see me? Then, what do they think of me? Okay. And based upon what do they think of me, there's usually an emotional response. So maybe you feel proud, maybe you're embarrassed, maybe you're confident, maybe you're insecure. And then what does that mean about who I am? So an example, a student gives a presentation. Okay, classmates are listening and their expressions are neutral. So the person giving the presentation thinks, "Oh my God, I am terrible." And so based upon the way that they look, they experience embarrassment, and as a result, their confidence goes down, and they conclude, "I'm bad at public speaking." Another student, on the same hand, sees the same faces, but they interpret it as they're paying attention. That's a very different conclusion. And as a result, their confidence may go up. But nonetheless, other people can shape our identity through praise, criticism, labels, expectation, repeated reactions, nonverbal behavior. Other people can become a social mirror that influences how we see ourselves. If a child repeatedly hears, like, "You're the smart one," or "You're the troublemaker," that can become incorporated into the self concept. And again, going back to the self schema here, that repeated social feedback results in the development of like self belief, which becomes part of that schema that bubble that we just showed, and future information that's interpreted through it. So the question here, who has more influence on how you see yourself? You think it's a stranger or somebody whose opinion matters to you? You might answer parents, friends, partners, teachers, coaches, peers. So, and then not every mirror carries equal weight. But there is something really important about Cooley's idea. The mirror we're looking into isn't always accurate. So the perceived appraisal is not actually the actual appraisal. So our self-concept is influenced again by how we think others see us, not necessarily how they see us. Just because somebody has a neutral expression while you're giving a presentation, that doesn't mean that they're not impressed. They could be super impressed. That's just how their face looks. The looking glass self doesn't require the other person to actually think I'm incompetent. I might simply believe they think I'm incompetent. And then I respond accordingly. So, another example, friend doesn't respond to text. And again, I could interpret it as they're busy, or they're annoyed with me, or I'm always bothering people. Same event, different interpretations. And my schema influences those interpretations. Depending upon how I see myself, I'm going to interpret those things differently. We misread reactions, assume judgment, overestimate how much others even notice us. We interpret ambiguous feedback through what we already believe about ourselves. We overestimate mistakes, awkward moments. Most people don't even notice those things. And the reason we do that is because we're the center of our attention. So we, again, egotistically assume that everybody else noticed. But the reality is, we're the center of our attention. Other people, they're just as much the center of their own attention. Okay, let's say somebody answers a question incorrectly in class. They think, "Well, everybody must think I'm stupid." The reality, most people weren't even paying attention in the class. 25% were sleeping. Other people forgot in 30 seconds. All right, nobody cared. But the perceived judgment can still affect confidence, whether they participate in the future. And it's kind of a feedback loop, okay? I think people see me as awkward. And so as a result of that, I'm probably going to become kind of quiet and guarded. And so my actions might actually become awkward. And then they really do think I'm awkward. So now the perceived judgment begins influencing my own behavior. And again, that starts sounding like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we will get there. But there is another way people become mirrors. Sometimes we don't ask, what do they think of me? We ask, how do I compare to them? Okay, so I paused it for a second. I apologize. How do we know if we're good, so to speak? This gets into the social comparison theory by Festinger in 1954. All right. So, how do we know whether we are tall? Now, this is a fairly easy question because we can objectively measure ourselves, right? But the thing is that can even become comparative because let's say, okay, for a guy, I'm just gonna say a guy, maybe 6 foot, you're tall. Ladies, I don't know. I'm gonna go with 5'7" because that's my height. God knows, I do not know what tall is. But if you're in the NBA, I'm sorry, 6 foot. I don't know if you're gonna make it. We're heading toward like 6'8" if you want to be like a point guard. So it's really relative to the comparison group. Okay, so this is even harder. How do you know if you're successful? There's no ruler for that. Okay, that's going to depend on like your peers, how old you are, your occupation. What are your own expectations and the expectations of absolutely everybody around you? What's your culture? So Festinger indicated people have a drive to evaluate opinions and abilities. When objective information is unavailable or it's ambiguous, we make social comparisons. So, an example with an exam. All right, you get an 84%. So, what's your reaction? If the average for the class is 62%, awesome. I did great. If it's 96%, oh my God, I did horrible. The score is the same, but the psychological meaning is different because the comparison changed. Now, the comparison can also provide social information. Okay? Example, you're nervous before an unfamiliar event, but you look around and everybody's calm. So you think, all right, maybe I'm overreacting. If everybody looks nervous, okay, yep, I'm right. This is very stressful. So comparison isn't only for competition or self-esteem, it's also there for understanding reality. Who do we compare with? Again, usually we look to people who are similar. And Festinger said that comparison is most informative when the target is relevant or comparable, or the person is relevant or comparable. So college students might compare like classmates with classmates. They're probably not going to compare with like Nobel Prize winners or kindergartners. So social comparison, it's not necessarily unhealthy. It's actually a basic social information gathering process. But the direction of the comparison does matter. And this is upward or downward social comparison. And again, upward does not mean bad, downward does not mean good, and vice versa or anything like that. But if we're talking about um, upward comparisons, this is when we compare ourselves to like, okay, the top student in the class, or the best athlete in the conference, or somebody who is very successful at work, or somebody who is like 8% body fat. And the thing is that could be inspirational if those things feel, or those people, or that target feels attainable. Like they did it, like, oh my God, maybe I can do that too. But if the gap feels too big, like, oh my God, I'm never going to be that good. I'm never going to be that successful or that athletic. I'm not going to be 8% body fat. That could result in like, I'm just discouraged. Your self-esteem might drop. Okay, then we have downward comparison, and this is comparing to somebody who's struggling more. So again, somebody that's, not as in good of shape, somebody that doesn't compete as well, somebody that doesn't perform as well in class, somebody that might show up late to work. And so this can provide perspective as to like, well, I guess I'm doing okay. It reassures you that you're doing well. You might be grateful that like, oh my God, I really am doing okay and my hard work is paying off. But it could also, again, it could discourage improvement. Like, I don't need to get any better. Look at these other people. I'm performing plenty well. Like, I'm not great, but at least I'm better than them. So identification really does matter here. The upward target, great, that could be me someday. That's motivational. Versus that's everything that I'm not. That's threatening. So again, what are we identifying with here? The same comparison target can affect two people very differently. The interpretation matters. So if you wanted to know how you're doing academically, who would you give the most useful comparison? Probably similar student, same class, similar experiences, background, so on and so forth. You're not going to look at the absolute highest or lowest performer. Okay. But are those people we're comparing ourselves with online? Usually it's not. And social media and digital technology took us to a whole new realm. Okay. And again, social media does not cause self-esteem issues. I just have to say that here. And it's not bad for everybody. The effects vary, all of that. So just so we're clear here. Um, but the social media does give us access to more comparison targets than ever. The comparison environment is wide. Historically, the comparison pool were people that were in our direct vicinity, classmates, coworkers, neighbors, friends. Now, you've even got celebrities, influencers, strangers, the most elite athletes on the planet, thousands, millions of people. And again, the algorithms can expose us disproportionately to the most exceptional outcomes on the planet, the 0.0001% outcomes. Okay. So, like, you open Instagram after a normal Tuesday. Okay. You see people just got engaged. They just got promoted. They went on like a 20-day vacation to Italy. They finished a marathon. Their kitchen is perfect. They are the happiest family in the world. Okay. My Tuesday. Okay. I survived work. I did laundry and I'm eating leftovers. And again, for me, honestly, this is me actually speaking. That's a great day. I'm content. Nonetheless, for a lot of people, the conclusion is everybody else is doing better than me. My life sucks. Everybody else's life is perfect. But here's the thing, the comparison sample is not representative. You're comparing your backstage life, like what's actually happening, to their front stage. Only the stuff that they are willing to put out in front of the curtain. We know our doubts, failures, arguments, the photos that we aren't willing to post, the things that are boring. We know those things. We don't see theirs. Social media, here's the other thing, okay? I just don't want to completely hate on social media because it can be good things. So it can provide inspiration, belonging, information, connection, role models, communities, all of that kind of stuff. That's great. Um, for example, like you could see like somebody like me accomplish this. That can be motivational. So the takeaway isn't to stop comparing because whether we like it or not, it's not going to be like that. But whether your comparison target is giving you meaningful information, that's what's important. So other people influence how we evaluate ourselves, but sometimes other people's beliefs about us can do something even more powerful. It can change how they treat us, which can change how we behave, until their original expectation actually comes true. And that gets us into the self-fulfilling prophecy, which we will cover when we return.